Hi everyone. Thank you for spending a little bit of your afternoon with me. I hope you're very welcome, and I hope you enjoy the session. I made bunting today, given that it's an Eden project thing. It felt like bunting was required. So just by very way of brief introduction to me, I'm Kathryn Welch. I'm a freelancer, and I'm interested really in any part of the world where creativity meets community. I'm interested in bringing people together, having interesting and different kinds of conversation, and projects that make our world and our neighbourhoods a little bit more joyful, a little bit more colourful, and a little bit more interesting. I founded a community project called Stirling Soup back in 2017, and I was an Eden Project community camper that year as well. If anybody hasn't come across the Eden's community camps, they were great for me in kind of helping turn ideas into reality, and I'd definitely recommend them. So since then I've ran big lunches and fun palaces, and I'm currently, since lockdown, involved in a couple of community growing, gardening projects, helping people get growing their own food for the first time. So they're kind of some of the experiences that I'll probably touch on along the way today, and we'll hopefully draw in a few of your experiences as well. So the thing that I was invited to talk about today, and the thing that I'm looking forward to sharing with you, is a mini project, I guess, called Let's Get Started, that I've been running on Twitter throughout August. So at the very beginning of August, it was literally the first when I came up with this idea. I was reflecting back on some of the projects that I've been involved in and thinking, what are the things that I wish I'd known at the beginning? What are the things that have really taken me this long to start to figure out? And also, what are the things that I want to remember when I go into the next project or projects that I'm involved in? So I started writing them down, and I've been sharing them once a day on Twitter. I'll stick when I stop talking for a second, I'll stick my Twitter handle in the chat so that you can join along there if you'd like. And I'm going to share most of them with you today. I'm really conscious of not wanting to preach to the choir. I know that there'll be loads of expertise in the room, that lots of you will have done way longer and way many more projects than I have. But I thought, as well as hearing from my experience, it is really nice to encourage you all to reflect on what you've learned. Some of it will be the same as mine, I'm sure. Lots of it is very, tends to get lots of nods and lots of smiles. And some of it will be different, but whatever it is, I think it's worth taking a moment to think, what are the bits that make our projects really special? What are the bits that we've had to fight for and get wrong and struggle with in order to create really beautiful projects, so that we can learn from each other and from our own experiences and take that forward with us. Tip a day, so 31 tips. So there are currently 27 to work through, and I wrote this talk yesterday, so you might get 26. And what I did is, so they look like this. They're very low tech. This is origami paper that I got from the works about 4 years ago and was sitting in my my trunk at home, and has become a tip a day. So what I did when I was planning today is spread them out of my dining table and start to try and put them into categories, because I wrote them as a train of thinking, and I wrote a few when I started, and then I've just gone back to it and added a tip now and again whenever one's popped into my head. So it's been quite an interesting process for me to think, well, what have I talked about? What themes do these naturally put themselves into? And I thought I'd open with 3 general principles, and gloriously, Anya, who was in my group in the breakout room, pretty much nailed the first one. So my first one was start first and then refine. So Anya rephrased that beautifully as, the best idea is the one that you do. And I think it can be summarized as crack on with it. It can be so tempting, I think, to wait for your idea to be perfect before you get started. But actually just putting yourself out there, putting your idea out there and saying, I've got a little bit of an inkling of something that might be cool. Will you come with me? Will you add your ideas to it? And let's together build something better. So rather than holding on to an idea in your heart or in your head, if you can, get it out there, get it started, refine as you go. Secondly, this is, I guess, the structure of a project in train. Secondly, be really clear on what your non-negotiables are. So if there are values or principles or activity that is absolutely at the core of your project, that is unshakable to you, be really clear about them to yourself and be really clear about sharing them with others. And the great thing about those is that there tend not to be many of them. Truthfully, your project is very likely to be fluid and flexible in loads of areas. But if you can be really clear about what your values are and what's not negotiable, it gives you a framework to assess new ideas and new developments against. People will come up with loads of stuff with you, It's nice to say yes wherever you can, and we'll come on to that. But if you can be really clear about what is negotiable and what really isn't, it helps you embrace new ideas without going too off-piste. And the third kind of general principle is to think as early as you can about letting go or an exit strategy. And this is one that's been really important to me. I'm not somebody that tends to stick with a project forever. And I know that if I start a project, the healthiest thing for the project's survival long term is that I think from the beginning about how and when I get myself away from it. And right from the beginning, thinking about who else needs to be involved, what kind of structures do I need to create, how do we kind of create an open environment where other people can take leadership and responsibility, so that when the time comes, either that you want to step away, and that's a totally acceptable and beautiful thing. I don't think we should be thinking we need to be involved in everything forever, or when life gets in the way and you have to take a step back, there are people there from the beginning who are confident that they can take over and take on and take the leads. So to build a project that can outlive you. So they were my 3 lessons that came together as like, that for me is the life span of a project. And then there were some more particular things. So the first subcategory, I guess, that I came up with, it was about building a squad. And in my breakout room just now, I think it was Susie who said, in a very kind of, here is a lesson I have learned many times, you always need more volunteers than you think. And I think that's something that many of us have nodded along to, yes. But the tips that I wrote, the phrases that I came out with as I was writing these tips were as follows. First, to find co-conspirators. And I always think of them like that, people who share your energy and share your excitement. And for me, that's pretty much the most important thing about the people that I do things with. Doesn't matter what their experience is, doesn't matter really how much time they've got, doesn't matter where they come from. The thing that matters to me is that they are excited and energetic and enthusiastic about taking whatever crazy idea is the current one forward, because their enthusiasm really creates for me like a wave that when you start to get tired, their energy picks you up, and you do that for each other. And that sense of co-conspirating and plotting together is one that feels really right for me. Secondly, find the amplifiers. So whatever you're working on, whether it's a geographic place-based thing, or whether it's a thematic project about music or about sport or about food, there are always people who are movers and shakers within that little part of the world. It's often you. I'm sure that lots of people would consider you to be amplifiers within your community. But there's always people who can share information with others, who people will look to for, is this a good thing? Is this a thing that we're doing? Are we saying yes to this? And the sooner you can get to them and the sooner you can kind of recruit them to your cause, the more they will do that work for you of sharing that enthusiasm and bringing people along with you and encouraging people to say, yeah, it's a cool thing, we know about it, it's happening. Now, the third tip in this category is possibly the most controversial of all of the ones I've put on mine so far. And it reads like this: be a bit shit. So I learned this from Stella Duffy, who is the queen of fun palaces and a genuinely inspiring human being. And it was something that I'd been aware of along the way, but she articulates it so beautifully that it's hard for other people to get involved in something if by the time they get to it, it's so perfect and so polished and so beautiful that there's very little they feel they can add. And I've experienced that. I'm sure we've all experienced that in ways. You see a project that's doing its thing and you think, gosh, they don't need me. Look at that. It's a beautiful thing. Actually, I'd make it worse. And people will then step back and not come forward to help. Even though they might admire it, it might be the most beautiful thing they've ever seen. If things are a little bit rough around the edges, it's much easier for people to say, God, you need a hand with that. I can help you with that. And you find that people more naturally will come to you and kind of go along with you on the journey. It's a way of opening yourself and your project up to them and saying, can you come and help me sort this out a little bit? And I've seen that work lots and lots of times. And I think it sits in hand with that start before you're quite ready. Be a bit shit. Along that, say yes to ideas. So I'm very conscious that if you start a project, you've often got an idea in your head before you begin about what it is and what it looks like. And then other people start coming along and they've got loads of ideas and it suddenly starts to run away from you and, oh, it's getting a bit big. The thing that I've learned is to say yes wherever you possibly can. for two reasons. The first is that it brings other people in and it brings their energy and their enthusiasm and their ideas and their experience. But the second is that it encourages people to keep bringing ideas to you. If you're the kind of person who says no to an idea, even once really, other people will look at that and go, oh, they're not really open to ideas. They've got this. So when you say yes to an idea, you're not just saying yes to that idea, you're saying yes to the idea of people coming forward with ideas. And for me, that's part of the letting go, the part of creating a project that is open for everybody to share and be part of. Next up, make it fun. People like to do good things, but they really like having fun. And sometimes I think we can get too caught up in being good and being worthy and doing good works. That is cracking, but we all like having a good time. So for me, if there's chocolate brownies, I'm much more likely to go. If there's a glass of wine, I'm quite likely to go. If there's a cup of tea, that'll do. Music always helps. The more you can create an atmosphere that is fun and is uplifting and that makes people go, yeah, I want to come to that because I had a good time. For me, I think the good gets done along the way. The work gets done along the way. The fun is what people come back for. And the more you can find ways to bring that along the way, the better. Thinking about building a squad, watch out for people on the sidelines. There are brilliant people. I think, again, we can all be those people who want to get involved, have so much to add, but find it hard to get involved. And I think that's especially true once your project gets a little bit further along, and people know each other and people have a role and people do, this is my bit and that's your bit. That's already starting to become quite established. It's quite easy to hover on the sidelines and it can be really hard to take that first step in. So that's a reminder for all of us, including myself, to look out for those who maybe are trying to take that first step in, whether that's a practical thing of stepping into your community hall or your garden, or whether it's an occasional text, say, oh, I saw that and it looked good. They're trying to find a way in, and sometimes we all need a bit of a help over the threshold the first time. And the final thing in building your squad is to ask who's not in the room. So we all like talking to people like us. It's easy, it's comfortable, it's safe, it's familiar. Lots of people might not fit any of those criteria and might bring a really different perspective. So I think it's always a good sign when you think, oh, I'd like to talk to them, but I feel a bit uncomfortable, or I feel a bit unsure, I'm a bit nervous. I quite often use that as a guide for, yeah, they're probably the people you should be talking to. So that keep checking in, check who's not there, and check who else you might talk to. And sometimes I think the most interesting perspectives can come from people who wouldn't naturally put themselves in that room. And that's one of the things we were talking about in our breakout group, actually, about how brilliant Zoom can be, but how you miss the passers-by. You know, sometimes when you can be doing an event on the high street or in a park, or that people can walk past and they never would have come along. It's just not for them, or they didn't think it was for them, but they might stop and hover, and then you might have a cup of tea going, or you might have something that people can just stand and watch. And it's that way of inviting people in. I think we really miss that in Zoom. And yeah, when we get back to our regular lives, it's a lovely way to invite people who wouldn't naturally put themselves in that room with you. So that's building a squad. And I think that's the longest. Building a squad just feels so vital. And like, if you get that right, everything else will come. And if you don't, it's going to be a lot of hard work for a very long time. So I definitely noticed when I was sorting my many cards, coloured cards, into piles, the building a squad one was the one I was like, yep. So that feels like the bit for me that is really at the heart of doing things well. However, almost as vitally, my next category is called doing more with less, doing stuff without money. And I think actually that's a glorious thing. You know, it can be so easy to use money as the reason that things don't happen or things are hard. Actually, and I'll talk about funding later, actually sometimes doing things with less can be absolutely the way to do the best kind of things. So my first card under this was called Beg, Borrow, Trade, Make. I didn't put steal in, I thought that was probably pushing it a bit far. The controversial cards are doing well, but stealing might be a step too far. But I think often resisting spending money until you absolutely have to is the way forward. Partly because thriftiness makes your project more feasible, partly because it makes it just more authentic. Like when I was writing these cards, I was going to do like, I've got a subscription to Canva and I could make them look all graphic designed, and you know, maybe this looks a bit rubbish. It does look a bit rubbish. It doesn't actually matter. This is bits of paper I had in the house. I've done it over my evening. I probably wouldn't have done it if I'd have done it in a fancy graphic design style, but doing it with what I had made it feasible. On a slightly larger scale though, I think asking for help and asking who's got some stuff I could borrow, have you got something that I could swap this for, could you lend me that for a bit, is a really nice way of opening up your network, building your network and bringing people into your project without saying, do you want to come and volunteer, or do you want to be part of this project? It's just a very easy first step in. Can I borrow your spade? You know, it feels very different to, do you want to come and build a community movement with me? It's a different kind of ask and a lovely way of forcing yourself to do that if that's not something that comes naturally to you. We can all be a bit shy. Two other things on doing more with less. One is about doubling up your impact. We've all got really finite time and finite energy, and often you can do twice as much good without doing any more work, and it's worth us always asking ourselves, what else could we do with this? So kind of piggybacking extra good stuff on top of the effort that you're already putting in. So the example that was in my mind when I wrote that was about when I ran Stirling Soup. We used to do a collection of something. So it was £5 to get in, bring us a fiver and a thing. Once it was cookbooks, someone was starting a little free library locally, and it was really easy for us to say, sure, bring a fiver, bring a book. And then by the end of it, the little free library was ready to go. And we could just hand those books over. That was that person's community project, off to an absolute flyer of a start. Another example that sprung to mind, another time we did bring a fiver and a box of sanitary towels. That was what the food bank was short of at the time. Again, it took zero effort. You know, it was a line that I added to the poster and actually made a huge difference to that organisation and what they needed at that time. Felt like an easy way of doing quite a lot of good with very little effort. So I think when we think about scaling our projects, don't always think about what more could we do? How could we put more effort in? How could we find more volunteers? How could we do more? There's also a thing about thinking, how could we not do more, but achieve more impact? And that kind of doubling up and piggybacking thing feels like a way of doing more without just rinsing more energy out of ourselves, because we're all busy people and we all get tired. And the final thing on doing more with less is probably the most transformational, and it's really simple. It's ask directly for help. I think we can feel so shy about that sometimes. And actually, it's lovely to be asked. When people look at you and think, you're a person that could help, you're a good person, you're a helpful person, I'd like you to be on my team. It's a lovely thing for someone to say. And it's much easier if they say, and could you do this specifically? So my experience is thinking about who's best placed to help, whatever it is that you need help with, who is best placed to say yes to that. So if it's that you need gardening equipment, is there a garden centre, or is there an allotment, or is there a local group of volunteers who look after hanging baskets in your town? That sort of thing. Who's already got the stuff that you need and could say yes with relatively low effort on their part? You know, if you ask somebody for whom it's a massive stretch, they're much less likely, or it's a bigger ask for them. So try and find out who could give it to you, and then just ask really directly. You don't need to be shy. Like, politeness is nice, manners are good, definitely encouraged, but we don't always need to be so apologetic. It's fine to ask. You're doing a good thing. Other people are very happy to get involved. And I think we need to get over ourselves a little bit in excuse me, thinking, oh, I'm sorry to ask. I hope you don't mind. Oh, it's a really big ask. Probably isn't. Just ask. If they don't want to do it, they'll say no. It's not the end of the world. Move on. And actually, yeah, it's a nice way of building our network. It's a nice way of bringing people along with us. Often it gets loads done for very little effort from anybody. So don't be shy. If you need it, ask. I did a couple of practical things. So I've got a section called funding and marketing, and it's got precisely 3 points in it. I can talk more about those things another time, but they didn't feel as core to this as I thought they would, actually. I think we all get, it's all easy to think, gosh, well, the first thing I need is money, and the second thing I need is marketing. I don't think that's true. I think they help along the way when you get them right. But they were much less prominent when I came to download 30 tips from my brain. They were less prominent than I expected in things that have made a difference. So my first tip in that category was funding. Proceed with caution. And I don't want to sound like, oh, money is really important. Money makes all of our worlds go round. Sometimes you just need a load of cash. That's totally cool. But you don't always. And in my experience, more isn't always better, actually. And it changes things like power and flexibility and control and obligation. It's really different to do something because you have to, even if you wanted to, because you asked for the money for it. Once you have to, it's different, it feels different. And it can also really change how open people are to coming forward. I think if people know that you're scrapping around and doing it with nothing, we all lend our enthusiasm to it so wholeheartedly. Whereas if people think there's a big chunk of cash sitting there and they just need to get it spent, we all sit back a bit. I've seen myself doing it, even though I know it's not really how things work. So yeah, money is good, money is useful. It can be fundamental, it can be transformational, but make sure it is before you ask for it. Make sure that money is really the thing that you're stuck on and not energy or goodwill or connections, because all of those things money doesn't really help with, and can actively hinder. So yes, do it, sure, do it, but do it when it's right for you. On marketing, my most simple and most effective tip is take decent photos. Honestly, we all forget that, don't we? Because you think, oh, I must get good photos. And then the day comes and you're talking to people and you're dashing to the supermarket to get something you forgot, or you're making rounds of tea, or it just feels a bit awkward to get your camera out. And very often you can find that you get to the end of something and it's been glorious and people go, oh, what was it? And you've got nothing to show them. And I think when it comes to either raising the profile of what you do or telling people who haven't seen it what you do, or even just having a bit of a bank of evidence that make people go, oh yeah, that is a thing, photos can make a real difference. I'm slightly conscious that I think photographers get asked for their time for free a lot. I've often had great photographers putting themselves forward to volunteer, and it's been fundamentally transformational. So I feel very lucky for that. Equally, the photos, they don't have to be professional photography photos. You know, if you've got someone with a bit of dedicated time and an iPhone, that'll do. Probably not even an iPhone nowadays. That'll do. It's more the putting the energy in to think about getting photos. They do matter, I think, particularly if you do an event that isn't there all the time. So if you do a community garden, for example, the photos are there all the time. If you haven't got any, it's fine, nip out and take one when it comes about. But if you do a festival once a year and you don't get photos, and a month later someone goes, well, is it this kind of festival or that kind of festival? It can be very hard to show people, this is what it feels like, this is what it looks like, this is the spirit of the event. So sometimes it is a now or never kind of thing with photos. And my experience is that they are very worthwhile investing a bit of time and a bit of thought into. And my final one on funding and marketing is blow your own trumpet. No one else is going to do it. So I was shortlisted for an award once, the Scottish Charity Awards, it's called. And I entered myself for that award, and I think that's really important to say. And it was transformational in other people noticing and paying attention to what we were doing. Yeah, I think we can be a bit shy about the idea of, can I nominate myself? Yeah, you can. If you want it, you're probably going to have to put yourself forward for it. It's lovely when these things arrive as a surprise, but it doesn't always happen like that. And if you think an award might be a useful thing, I think it's worth saying that if you don't, or if you're shortlisted and don't win it, or if you enter and don't get shortlisted, that's nothing to do with how good your project is. That's a different thing. If you find an award would be a useful thing in raising the profile of your project or bringing it to the attention of other people, it can be a useful way of doing that. There are two that I'm aware of. One's in Scotland, which is the Scottish Charity Awards, and they do an award which I think is called Community Champions. It's projects like ours, that's what it's for. The other is the Epic Awards, which is run by Voluntary Arts. They run once a year, and they've currently just announced their shortlist, so it'll be a year until that comes around again. But again, it's designed for projects like ours. It's designed to celebrate, to raise the profile, to champion work that happens in communities. And again, if you feel like your project could do with a bit of a boost, if you think your volunteers would enjoy being recognised in a kind of national, impressive feeling way, or if you feel like there are councillors, for example, who have a real shout at saying whether or not your project gets permission, and something like that would help, for example. Or whether you need to bring local businesses on board and it helps to say, oh, we got shortlisted for an award. They can be useful things. You can enter yourself. They're the two things that I wanted to say. Don't be coy. It's genuinely really good what you're all doing. So don't be too shy about it. Then, how are we doing? 20 minutes. Okay, we're good. So transparency. Oh, yes, somebody's mentioned Surf Awards. The details in the chat. Yes, they're amazing also. I've just never entered one, which is why it wasn't top of my list, but thank you for mentioning surf awards. And I'm sure, apologies for those that aren't in Scotland, my knowledge is more Scottish than UK wide, but there will be similar awards, I'm sure, in your area, and often just kind of local ones as well. Our local, I think it's run by the council, it might be run by like the Third Sector Interface or someone like that, that does a local volunteering award. And again, they can be relatively easy to get your hands on an award like that. So if you think it'll be useful, do it. So yes, transparency is the next bit, which is about showing you're working and about not keeping too much inside your head for too long. I think particularly in the early days of a project, when even the most collaborative community projects tend to have a kind of a leader or a couple of leaders, even if it's only because there's only 3 of you involved. So by default, people look to you as the leaders, and gradually as things grow, that can become less apparent. But when you're first putting yourself out there as a, I've got an idea, what do you think? I think certainly I can be tempted, I'm sure lots of us can be tempted, to pretend that you're on top of things. To be like, yeah, I've got this idea and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and it's all going to go off, it's all going to go well. But actually people really like to be helpful. And if you don't pretend you're on top of everything, if you shout about the knotty problems and the things that you're really stuck on and the things that you don't know how they're going to go, or you don't know how you're going to fix that answer, then again, it encourages people to come forward and to help you find the solutions. So being really open and really transparent about either the things that are going wrong, or the things that you don't know the answer to yet, or the things that are posing a real problem for your future. I think the more you can talk about those and get them out, the better. Shared decision making is the next transparency point. And that feels like an obvious thing, but can often be a hard thing to realise, especially where you might have quite a big community of people who are involved a little bit and who wouldn't necessarily see themselves as decision makers within your project. Handing over some decisions in a way that feels appropriate can be really nice. So quick things like Facebook polls are grand, but also things like put a token in this pot or that pot, you know, like the Tesco voting things. If you've got something that people throw away or get rid of at the end of your project, the thing that sticks in my head is Innocent Smoothies did it when they first started. I know they're not a community project, but I think they first popped up at a festival, and they gave people their smoothies in little bottles. It was all being quite so worried about plastic, I think. And there were bins at the end that said, should we quit our jobs and do this full time? And people voted by which bin they put their plastic bottle in at the end. I assume most people put it in the yes bottle and the rest is history, but maybe they didn't and they just turned it into a really good marketing story at the end. But I really like that idea of people can vote, people can have a say in a tangible way that does make a difference, even if all they're doing is sticking something in a bin or moving a rock to a particular plant pot or whatever it is. If passers-by can help, if they can get involved, if they can have a say, I think not only does it give you real legitimacy in what you're doing, because if it's just for you, it's not a community project, it's just yours, which is fine also, but not the same. And also it helps people feel like they've been part of it, even if it's just in a curiosity way. I think sometimes if people can say, oh, and they asked if I wanted to do that, and then I thought about it, and actually I voted for that, but then I came away and thought about it, and I don't really think that anymore, or I'm not sure, or I'm going to go back and ask. It just starts a dialogue, particularly with people who might not naturally have those kind of conversations with you, or might not feel invited to have those kind of conversations about big stuff as well as about little stuff. And just on that, actually, in terms of sharing decision making, I think people who aren't involved in your project, it's easy to criticize from the outside, isn't it? And the more transparent you can be, the more you can help people to realize that you're not making exclusively perfect decisions. You're making the best decisions you can with the information and the resources that you've got. So the more you can be transparent about, yeah, we're doing this and it's not perfect, and I made a decision that you might not like, because the more it kind of helps to out some of that and out the complexity that you're working with, because community projects aren't always straightforward. Sometimes they're really naughty. And it's easy for people to point fingers from the outside and go, well, you should be doing it like that, actually. And the more you can be open about the material that you're working with and the information that you're working with to make the best decisions that can be made, the more it starts to counter that it's easy to look in from the outside and pick faults. And finally, on that transparency thing, there's the thing about showing you're working, about really outing what makes projects happen. And partly I've written actually to help others appreciate how things work. I think also to help people see where things don't work and where the struggles are. But it's very easy for people to make assumptions about your project, often about money and how it's paid for. And the more you can be open about that and how it doesn't work as well as how it does, the more people can get involved in a way that's helpful to you. So I was chatting to a friend who runs a series of gigs in Leith in Edinburgh. People assume that their entry money pays for her costs. Absolutely doesn't, comes nowhere near. But people look at, you pay your money and you think, well, that's that covered, I've paid my bit. So can be quite resistant to things like if you need to buy a raffle ticket, or actually it really helps if you spend money at the bar rather than bringing your own drink, those sorts of things. The more you can be open about that, the more people often will help, but they don't always realise that that would be a helpful thing. So when I ran Stirling Soup, for example, you paid a £5 to come in, and all of that money went to a community project. I'll try not to go into detail just so that I don't spend half an hour talking about Stirling Soup and why I love it so much. But all of those entry money went directly to a local project. So it was really important for me to be able to say, the way that we make this work is you spending money on the raffle. That's the only way that we can pay for the cost of the room. Actually then, people were so over generous with the raffle that at the end of every event, I was like fishing money out the raffle pot and sticking it into the pot to give to the winners, the community pot. Because people had then been so kind of outpouringly beautiful and okay, I'll buy all these raffle tickets. But until then, people kind of assumed that, well, you asked me for a £5 when I came in, so that's that done. And they were more than willing to help. I just needed to tell them what would be genuinely helpful. And then the final point that I wanted to end on, I feel like I've said is the most useful at all, perhaps they're all useful. I suppose to me, this category feels most useful because it's so easy to forget. And it's about resilience and about self-care and about looking after yourself. It's so easy, isn't it, to pour so much of ourselves into these projects, and it's tiring and it's hard, and it can burn us down and run us out a bit. And I think it's important to be open about it, and it's important to plan for that not to happen, because it's nice if it doesn't. So I had 4 things that I thought had helped me around resilience and around self-care, and I thought that would be a really nice note to end on. So the first thing about resilience is make sure you really care. Community projects can be so hungry of your energy and your emotion. You're going to really need that care to see you through it, that passion, that sense of this is my thing, I'm going to achieve this. So I think the real tip is be picky about what you commit to. I think when people see us doing good stuff in communities, people like to invite you to be on things and to be part of things. I think the more often you can say no, the better, in a way, because the more that preserves your energy and your time to be able to give to the things that you really care about. Anything, or before you say yes to anything that is likely to grow into this hungry beast, make sure you really care, because you are going to need that. Secondly, be an optimist. Again, we talked about this in our breakout group about the need for a plan B, but also you very rarely need a plan B in the area that you thought you'd need a plan B. Those bits tend to go all right. It's the bits that you didn't see coming that can be the thing. That said, I think we need to dare to dream really big, and to believe that brilliant things are absolutely possible, and to assume the best of people and ideas and projects, assume that people will say yes, assume that people will come along, and start at least with that wave of course this will be the most brilliant project that there's ever been, of course there will. We have to believe it, because that'll take us a long way towards getting there, and keep us positive whilst we battle through the bits that aren't that straightforward. Penultimately, I like this one, even though I find it really hard. Expect some people not to like it, and in related news, expect some people not to like you. And I think that's really hard, because I don't want to not be liked. I don't want anyone to criticize me. It really hurts. I'm a real baby when it comes to criticism. But I'm very aware that many of the most effective plans, many of the things that most need to happen, are likely to meet opposition along the way. And we're just going to have to put our big girl and big boy pants on and just get used to that, I think. Not everyone has to love you. Not everyone has to love your project in order for it to be a good idea. And maybe quite the opposite. Maybe if people hate it, maybe if people have a strong reaction to it, maybe that's the project that really needs to happen. And I have no answers to how you do that, because it still really hurts me if people don't like me and don't like it. But when I look around at the projects that I really admire and the people that I really admire leading them, they meet opposition all the time, and actually they fight really hard to make their things happen. And the person that was in my head was Alan Young? God, that's terrible. Anyway, he runs Slung Low Theatre Company, which bought a working man's club and has looked after it and reimagined it and made it a useful, amazing thing. And he meets criticism all the time. He's very open about people shouting at him and people not liking what he's doing to the club, and him battling 100 different opinions about how things should be done. He is doing wonderful, important work, and he meets opposition all the time. And I quite often use him as my inspiration for sometimes we need to be bold enough to go not just where exclusive love is. Sometimes we need to be bold enough to go where there's a mix of love and hate, and face on as well. And my last tip, and then we've got 10 minutes to go, so we can do something else. My last tip is look after yourself. Do it. Look after each other. You don't need to be a hero, and you don't need to be a martyr, and it's better if you don't. So we need to absolutely prioritize taking breaks, prioritize having time off, absolutely make space to delegate, do it as a matter of radical self-love and self-care. Community projects tend to be marathons, they're very rarely sprints, and burning ourselves out in month one or even year one of a project is not going to serve anyone. So much as we can be passionate and enthusiastic and throw ourselves into these projects, keep taking time to step back and look after yourself. I know from all of my experience with Eden Project communities and the people that they support, you are all doing amazing work, and we need to look after each other. We need to look after ourselves to keep doing it, because the world will be poorer and lesser if we all run out of energy and stop doing it. So sometimes I think the most important community project you can do is to not do one for a bit. If you need to have a break and acknowledge that life gets in the way and life is messy and complicated and you're tired, if you need to stop for a while, totally do that. Take that time. Yeah, you don't need to be a hero and you don't need to be a martyr. That's it. They are the tips as I have written so far. However, it's day 27. So I've also written day 31 because I wanted to end on a particular note. However, I currently have days 28, days 29 and days 30 sitting here entirely blank. I'm hoping you might help. So if you have a tip or a lesson or a thought, and particularly one that hasn't really come out, if you said something in your starter group or if you've been thinking about something since then that I haven't really touched on, I'd really love to hear it. And I think you don't just need my expertise, we have loads of expertise in the room. So I wonder, I think this works, if you have a tip that you think is pertinent to now, I'd love it if you'd unmute yourself and shout it at us. And I'm the queen of really long, really awkward silences, so if no one does it, I'm just going to wait.
I don't really have a tip there, but it is incredibly hard to follow your energy. I just wanted to say thanks so much. I popped it in the Survey Monkey. Best Zoom meeting I have had in ages. And my tip would be always ask first. Don't bowl in there with your idea, kind of mute them. Just ask, bring people on board that way. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And actually, there may be a tip in what you've just said there, which is say thank you to people. Isn't it lovely to be thanked? Honestly, and if you hadn't said that, I don't really have that much of a sense of how this is going down. You've got your lots of little pictures. It's lovely to hear that you like it. So yes, thanks for saying thanks, and let's all remember to say thanks, not just to me. That sounds really self-serving. Where people are doing lovely things, let's make a point of recognise it and saying thank you to each other, so that we all get that little bit of a boost. Thank you, Kerry. That was lovely. More tips. We've got 8 minutes. We can fill them. And equally, if you have questions, feel free to ask. But your tips are nice too.
So when I'm presenting, Kathryn, I'm also the queen of awkward silences, but when somebody does it to me, then I have to fill it. So yeah, I've got a taste of my own medicine there. There was a question in the chat that I wondered if now's a good point while other people are mulling over their top tips that may not have been already aired, which was from Linda, and she experienced people are more likely to take things and want to be helped than they are to request to help, and so they sort of turn away when asked for anything. And she was wondering how you would go about changing that culture in your...
That's really interesting. Yeah, apologies anyone that's put stuff in the chat. I haven't really been able to keep up with it, but I am now just quickly scrolling back through it. See that people around me want to take things and be helped rather than ask to help. That's really interesting. I quite often find the opposite, that people find it really hard to accept help. So I think probably depends who's around you, what kinds of communities you're working in and with. And I'm very conscious actually a lot of the time that we all, I do it sometimes too, are quite keen to look to others for help, and the local council is definitely the most common scapegoat, again by me sometimes, of, oh, someone should do something about this, without having the corresponding sense of that someone could be me. So that sense of kind of looking out for help rather than in. And it's difficult because I think often the people who you help, for want of a better phrase, the people who take, are often best placed to give and to become both. And I think the most beautiful and the most sustainable community projects are those where we don't have people who give and people who take, we just have people who are involved, and we all do those things at various times and in various ways. So you don't want to get into a world where you kind of, if you're going to take this, could you help as well? And that kind of trade-off, because that often isn't in the spirit of things. But I think it is really easy to see people in those categories as either you are a volunteer and you're helping, or you're a like beneficiary and you're taking. And I think the thing that I have learned in the project that I'm involved in at the moment, so I started a community garden at the end of our block of flats just before lockdown. And our street is so mixed, by which I mean one side of the street is a block of 8 flats. So we're one of them. They're mostly council flats. And the other side of the street is very big, grand, detached, gated houses. And so there's a bit of a them and us on the street. And I definitely had preconceptions about who would and who wouldn't help with the community garden. I was almost exclusively wrong. And it's been really surprising to me, which says way more about me than about anybody else. It's been surprising to me who has come forward and who has really benefited from it. So my next door neighbour is a drug dealer, not the like black BMW kind, like the really sad kind. And they've been amazing. And the people who've been coming to their house to buy their drugs have also been amazing. And I hadn't expected that. And as I say, that properly is like judgment on me, but I hadn't expected that. And sometimes all they've given is that bit of a thank you, or a kind word, or a what's that, or a, I think what people give can be different depending on their circumstances, but they've given loads to me in terms of, there's a guy who leans on the gate and he says, it's lovely what you've done here, love. And honestly, of things that have made a difference to me, that's pretty high on the list. Like, if your day is mostly about survival and about not being genuinely horrible, then to find time and space in your head to lean on a gate and say, this is a lovely thing you've done here, I think that's a beautiful gift. And I don't want to be like overly mushy about it, but I'll take that. I'd rather have that than somebody who gave me an armful of plants or an armful of plant pots. So yeah, that's a very long-winded answer. I'm not sure it really answers the question. But I think the idea of who can give and what they might give can be much wider than we expect.
Yeah, and it depends on what giving is. I tried to respond, but not in as fluent way as you did, Kathryn. So I was saying that what people give is different for each person. So some people, for them, committees are totally their bag. They want to be a committee member, and so that's their way in. Other people will offer a raffle prize, and that's their way in. Other people want to stand behind a stall or have an hour to give at a set time of a day, you know, as part of a fete or something. Other people want to do prep work. And so if you can find different opportunities and give lots of options for people's way-ins, then they usually continue after that. Yeah,
and I think not being held to unflexible structures unless you really need to be. I think it can be so quick, can't it, to get to, oh, we need a committee and therefore we need a secretary and a treasurer and a chair. Actually, that format serves us really poorly even when you do need it. So even when you don't, we don't need to push ourselves down that structure all the time unless it serves you well. So keeping that flexibility so that those who maybe only have an hour here and there, or maybe have really unpredictable energy to give, creating a structure that allows them to give as well, I think is really helpful. I'm conscious of loads of brilliant tips now coming out in the comments as we are 2 minutes to go. So what I am going to do, if this is all right with you all, I will download the chat at the end so that I can hang on to your tips. And if you're happy for me to do so, please shout if you're not. I'll share some of these as kind of add-ons to the tips that I've already shared. Some of them kind of develop a card that already exists in a really helpful way. And some of them are new, and I might snaffle them for days 28, 29 and 30 if nobody minds. So that I'll try and share, I'll download them now and try and share as many of them as I can. And I will add my Twitter account here, which is what I meant to do way earlier in the chat. So where do we get the cards from? So my Twitter account is below. And I'm sharing one a day, so you can just scroll back and look through them. If anybody doesn't have Twitter, I am also compiling the list on my website, which is there. Someone was like, you're going to make a book? And I was like, I could punch a hole in the corner and tie them together. That's as close as it's going to get. But all the tips are written up and shared on my website, which is, it's got a blog section and it's one of those. So yes, I think this talk, Sam, is going to be recorded and shared and everything. But if you just want the tips written down so that you don't have to scribble, I should have said that at the beginning, then feel free to just grab them off my website. Yeah, I think that's it from me, but thank you all so much for coming along.